to start at 1 o'clock. That maybe we can, we're a little bit, a couple of minutes late here. The purpose of this is to go ahead and advertise the book that was just written by an author by the name of Philip Handelman, with cooperation with myself. Philip and I.
Can you speak a little louder?
Sure. Philip and I met some years ago when I moved to Michigan here. Philip is in his own right a prolific writer for a number of aviation magazines. He's won numerous awards. And when I met him, when I moved here in 1976, I was introduced to him, and we found mutual interest in some of the things that we were doing, such as flying. Philip has his private pilot's license, and he owns an iconic aircraft up at his property up in Oxford, Michigan here. That aircraft is known as a PT-17. It was the primary trainer used by both the Navy and the Army Air Corps for the training of its pilots during World War II. Philip has a ranch on this property up there, and it's extensive enough where he has 2 runways on this property, and one runs north-south and the other east-west. Us by having the same interest in flying there, I had during the days I was flying, up until a few years ago, we'd go up and visit Philip, and we'd fly around in his PT-17, and he would fly around with me in my motor glider that I had, the Schweitzer motor glider. Philip wants to offer his apologies that he was not able to make it here with me today. He does have illness in the family, and he may be here sometime in the future, but anyway, I just want to say that Philip has done a marvelous job, I think, in his writing. My daughter had asked me some years ago, she said, Dad, she said, why don't you write a book about your experiences, you know? I didn't want to tell her that I was too lazy to write a book. So Philip happened to come along about a year ago, I guess it was, and he said, Harry, I'd like to write a book about your experiences, and of course, how could I refuse? If he's going to write it, you know, that's it. So I gave him carte blanche as far as my study is concerned. I opened the door to my study, and I said, this is yours to go through all of my archives and records, and the same thing with the photo albums that I had in the basement, and some of the private letters that I had written and that type of thing. And he took this, and I think he turned it into an enjoyable book, hopefully an enjoyable book to read. The inauguration of this book was just on the 4th of June, and I was invited to Fox and Friends in New York, and it was inaugurated on that program there. You can pick it up. I think they rebroadcast it, and it's on the internet. From there, I went to Tampa, Florida, and I was with Tony Dungy down there, and I did a video with him. And then just last Saturday, my daughter and I flew out to Palm Springs, California, to the Aero Museum out there, and made a presentation in front of about 150 people out there. And then we went from there and drove up to Yorba Linda, to the Nixon Library. And we must have had a turnout. Somebody told me it was 500 people, but I'm a little more modest. I think it was more like 350 or somewhere around there. But anyway, during that time, since that inauguration here, we're kind of proud because there have been some statistics on the book here already as far as its popularity is concerned, and somebody sent me this and said they got it from the internet, but they say that the book is now #1 in military aviation history, that it's also #1 in African history, and #2 in U.S. military veterans history. It's 130 among all books in the Amazon system at this time. So it looks like it's doing pretty well. The book, I would say that to describe its genre, I would say that it's a inspirational book. It also takes in the history of African Americans in aviation, goes back before World War II and brings it up until today. Some of you here don't remember World War II, I presume, but those that do, I don't think there's anything new that I'm telling you, but let's go back there and see what the situation was at that time. Years prior to World War II, blacks were not trained or permitted to train for aircrew members or as pilots with the Army Air Corps at the time, which has later changed and became an entity unto itself called the United States Air Force. But it was the Army, it was under the Army at that time. The war clouds were gathering in Europe, and the people who had the foresight to see in the government that we would eventually become involved started entering some programs to be sure that our soldiers were properly equipped and ready in case they had to make the sacrifice by going into the service and fighting as soldiers there. At that time, as I mentioned, black Americans or black African Americans were not accepted for training, but there was a push by the certain segments of the government, some of the liberal newspapers, and that since we were fighting Nazis who espoused racial purity and ours, which preach liberty and justice and that type of thing, to go ahead and show our earnestness in this thing here, the Air Corps relented and said, we will go ahead and accept blacks as aircrew members and pilots. This was approximately in 1940 that this happened. At that time, the Air Corps said that, however, we will only accept the blacks for training under a segregated basis, strict segregated basis. So as a result, an airfield was built in Tuskegee, Alabama, called Tuskegee Army Airfield, and it happened to be about 9 miles from a college at that time that was established by Booker T. Washington, called Tuskegee Institute at the time, but today is named Tuskegee Institute. Getting back to the book again, Soaring to Glory, we had a number of illustrious people who have provided blurbs for the book here. One was Henry Louis Gates, and you probably know him and see him on TV quite often. I think he's involved with the Ancestry.com or some sort of thing like that. But his real job is professor at Harvard University. Another is that signed this book was Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Jefferson, who's one of 12 remaining combat pilots who flew with what's known as Tuskegee Airmen today. Using that term, it can be a mysterious term to some people. Of course, it really stands for African American pilots, or the organization that flew during World War II from 1941 up to somewhere around 1949. The numbers of people that are involved there, as I mentioned, there are 12 of us left who were combat pilots. That was out of 350 who were sent to combat. Of the total number of aircrew members or pilots that graduated and were in the Army Air Corps, it turns out to be some 996, something in that order. Of that number, as I said, 350 were sent overseas. 80 of that number lost their lives overseas. 35 were shot down and were prisoners of war and returned home after the war was over. And another 7 were what they call escapees. An escapee is a person who goes down in enemy territory and manages to elude the enemy and get back to friendly territory without being captured. You can imagine the difficulty involved as far as that's concerned with the African American and European country or Germany at the time there. But some of the German citizens were pro-American and helped those pilots that went down to escape. And anyway, getting back to the book here and getting back to my involvement with the Tuskegee, what some people know as experiment. And let me back up a little bit again. We were talking about Tuskegee Airmen and the name Tuskegee Airmen. And that was a name that was used by a doctor by the name of Charles Francis, who wrote a book back in 1972, 20-some years after the war had concluded. And looking for a title for the book here, he said, well, all of the people that I'm writing about were training down in Tuskegee, Alabama, so we'll call them the Tuskegee Airmen. So that was not the official title or anything, that's the Tuskegee Airmen. How many others were involved? You'd be surprised at the number, because in any organization like the Air Force organizations, to support one pilot, you probably need 10 people on the ground. I'm talking about cooks, bottle washers, drivers, mechanics, doctors, nurses, that type of thing. You add it up, there's about 10 to 1 ratio. As far as the Tuskegee Airmen is concerned, since it was a segregated organization, it was not as efficient as far as the utilization of the pilots and the aircrew members as you find in the white organization. So our ratio was about maybe 15 to 1. So I said that 996 pilots graduated, so I guess that would make the total number of Tuskegee Airmen who were on the base and supported the pilots, and it turned out to be about 15,000 people. So those are the Tuskegee Airmen who were on the ground. The 12 that I'm talking about and the 350 that went overseas were combat pilots. You may hear the term RedTails, and they were known as the RedTails at the time there, and it was no pejorative type of onus that was in the title itself. Everyone, or all of the fighter groups over there, had distinctive markings on their tails. And we had fellow fighter groups there. The 52nd Fighter Group, which was next door to us, had yellow tails. The 32nd Fighter Group had tannish-white tails. The 325th Fighter Group had checkerboard tails there. And all in all, there were 7 fighter groups over in the 15th Air Force where we were, and of course any number of bomb groups. The bomb groups consisted of B-17s and B-24s at the time there. My entrance came into the service in April of 1943, and I came in as a college graduate, or in fact, I had dropped out of high school at the time here. And I did take what had happened was the Air Corps did have rigid requirements as far as the mental or the educational background of the applicants for pilots were concerned. It had been 2 years of college, and what had happened, our losses at the beginning of the war were so astounding. We would have in the 8th Force the bomber pilots going out with and suffering 80% losses, that type of thing. It was tremendous. And they said, well, we're going to have a manpower problem in the future. We've got to lower the requirements as far as the entrance is concerned, educational requirements. And they said, well, if you can pass the examination, you will be qualified to go ahead and take the training. The government then said, what we will do is those pilots who do not have a equivalency of 2 years of college there, we will go ahead and establish what's known as a college training detachment within almost all of the major colleges in the United States there. So a lot of the youth at that time, in applying and passing the examination, who did not meet the educational requirements that the Air Corps was looking for, were sent for a 6-month period, free education, and lived on the campus there. In my case, I lived on the campus of Tuskegee University, and after which time I was sent over to the air base, which is about 9 miles from the college, and started my regular training as a pilot training. From there on, even though it was a segregated unit we trained as, we all in the entire Army Air Corps operated from the same playbook. So the training of the black pilots was absolutely no different whatsoever from the rest of the pilots. I did go through primary, which all the pilots went through, and flying the PT-17, and then after 10 weeks there, a more basic, going to a basic flying, which was going into a more complicated airplane, all metal, enclosed canopy, 450 horsepower engine, and then after 10 weeks in that is to fly the T-6, 650 horsepower, and it's more like a regular fighter plane. But soon after that, or 10 weeks after that, I graduated as a second lieutenant, and I had my wings here. I was 19 years old, and I still didn't know how to drive a car. The reason being, I was raised in New York at the time, and we didn't need a car in New York. The family didn't need a car. I then went overseas sometime after that, and went to Italy, where the 15th Air Force was established. 15th Air Force, the mission there was to escort bombers, and I mentioned before, B-17s and B-24s, to their targets in Central Europe. The largest escort mission that we went on was 1,600 miles round trip. We took the large armada of bombers up to Berlin and back. For the fighter planes, it was 6.5 hours in the air there, strapped in that little plane in the seat of it there. And for the bombers, it was even a longer time. As I said before, our mission was to protect the bombers, and these are both B-17s and B-24s. Each one of those bombers had a crew of 10 people, that's pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, and gunners. And that was really a responsible mission that we were on, to protect that crew, and that was our main mission, to protect those bombers from interception by enemy fighters. Ours was not only an onerous task, but our commanding officer, General Colonel Davis, at the time they had Benjamin O. Davis, who was a West Point graduate, forbade us to ever leave the bombers for looking out to get some what's known as fighter victories. And he said at all costs you stay with the bombers and you protect them, which we did. And we had, the 332nd Fighter Group had an enviable record as far as that's concerned. They had the best record in the 15th Air Force for the protection of bombers, and oftentimes, or not long after we started escorting them, the bombers themselves requested our escorting them, if it could be arranged. The war ended, of course, with the capitulation of Germany. I would say the book is full of the vignettes about the experiences, not only in combat, but here in this country before going overseas and after going overseas. Some of them quite interesting. The highlights being the first mission that I went on, or even before that, was my first solo in an aircraft. I had never been in an airplane before. I went down to Tuskegee to take the pilot training, and it was completely confusing to me when I did get in the airplane there, and I thought I wouldn't make it at first because I had fantasized as a kid what it would be like and what the controls would be like, and I fashioned them to them being something like the push cart, or the that I was used to ride around with as a kid. And you know, on that push cart, it had a bar across in the front there where you could push the wheels back and forth. Well, you remember you push your right foot in to turn left, and the wheels would turn this way, and you push your left foot in to turn right. And when I first got in the plane there, the instructor said, well, all right, make a left turn. And of course, I pushed my right foot in, and the plane went to the right. So but I was lucky to overcome it in time to advance along with the program that they had there. I guess the next experience was the first mission that I went on overseas, and it was a armada of some 400 or 500 bombers that we were protecting that day, and I just remember the memory of it. The bombers flying over, and with that number of bombers, they could be stretched out for almost 100 miles in a string, and we had flying over a segment of that bomber formation there. But I know you all have looked up in the sky and seen these jets passing by, and what's known as vapor trails that come out from a jet, these white vapor trails. Well, after getting up to a certain altitude, temperature altitude, these bombers, each one of their 4 engines starts putting out these vapor trails. And my first mission, I was sort of flying tail and Charlie, way in the back, and I could look up and see where these bombers were heading. But reaching this temperature altitude, all of these bombers start releasing these vapor trails, and you take 300 or 400 or 500 bombers, that's 4 times that the number of vapor trails. And then the fighters, because they're faster than the bombers, they would be circling, or rather making S-turns over the bombers, and they would also be pulling these vapor trails, but each fighter would be pulling a single vapor trail because it was a single engine fighter. But it was a spectacular sight, and it was what I call a symphony in the air, a ballet in the air of these aircraft and the jet streams, or the vapor trails that they were heading out. It's a sight that we'll never see again because we'll never use that number of bombers again. One bomber today can do as much damage on a target as all of the bombers in World War II. So it's a past sight that I have memories of, but I'll never forget. Another vignette is towards the end of the war. I was on a mission, bombing mission, or rather protect the bombers going to Austria. And we were up near Vienna at the time there, and the bombers had already delivered their bombs, and they were headed back home. And a segment of the fighter group that I was with, there were 7 of us, that was the segment that I wish to address, were asked to go on a fighter sweep. And a fighter sweep is just looking for targets of opportunities. As I said, we were up near the Danube, so look for some river barges and land there, look for train traffic, vehicular traffic, and also look for enemy fighter aircraft. And we were looking for trouble, and we found it. A horde of German fighters, FW-190s, attacked the 7 of us, and 3 of us were shot down. The first that was shot down, his plane was damaged enough where he was, sufficiently where he was able to make it to friendly territory in Yugoslavia. The second pilot, William Armstrong, he was killed instantly. And the third pilot, whose name was Walter Manning, his plane was disabled and he had to bail out near Linz, Austria. And he alighted in his parachute, and as soon as he did, a mob picked him up and delivered him to the local jail that they had in town. 2 nights later, another mob formed, and they broke in the jail and dragged Walter out, beat him up pretty badly, and then they lynched him from a lamppost. And this is not to say this only happened to black pilots at the time there, but all of the 15th Air Force pilots who were making those missions were in jeopardy of being lynched or shot, summarily shot. And the idea being that people were quite upset in these towns, of course, with the bombing raids, and they were having the next of kin killed and that type of thing. So the aircrew member who happened to bail out or crash land in that area would be vulnerable to the emotions of the people at the time, understandable. But anyway, that's one of the vignettes there, and I think it's kind of dramatic the way that Phil shows it there. We came back home from overseas in October of 1945. Went back to Tuskegee for a while, and then up to an air base in Columbus, Ohio, by the name of Lockbourne Air Force Base. It was at that time that the commanding general of the Air Force, Hoyt Vandenberg, decided that he wanted to resurrect a competition that the Air Corps did prior to World War II. And it was a gunnery competition, and it was to demonstrate which fighter group had the best training at the time and could make the best show. The best way I can describe it, to relate to you what it was like Tom Cruise in Top Gun, and what the Navy has, and that's just about what it was. It was 10 days of competition out in the area of Las Vegas, Nevada. It was out in the desert there, and it involved aerial gunnery at 20,000 feet, aerial gunnery at 10,000 feet, rocketry, skip bombing, dive bombing, and panel gunnery. At the end of that 10 days, there were 12 fighter groups in the country at the time. One, of course, being the Tuskegee Airmen, known as the 32nd Fighter Group. 3 pilots were selected from each of those fighter groups to compete in this gunnery contest. After the 10 days of the competition, the winner was announced, and the winner was Tuskegee Airmen. 1 month after that, the group that was stationed at Lockbourne, which was Tuskegee Airmen, which was the only base that had, well, not the only base, but base that had the majority of the black airmen at that time there and support groups. It was disbanded, and all of the personnel were sent to air bases throughout the world. And that's when the total integration of the Air Force ensued. We felt as though we were leaders in that type of thing because soon after that the Navy practiced the same thing, the Marine Corps and all of them as far as. So that today is that the Air Force is totally integrated. There's also a vignette about that fighter gunnery meet out in Las Vegas that took place in May of 1949. I got out of the service in January of 1950, and the first thing I did is, well, I found that it was, as far as the social system in the States was concerned at that time, it was the same old, as the social problems that were in force before the war or before I went into the service. They were the same when I came out of the service. I applied as with the hours of flying time I had to become a pilot with one of the airlines. In fact, I applied at two of the airlines, and I was rejected at the time because of my race. It wasn't until a couple of years after that that the airlines decided that, hey, we're going to go ahead and integrate as far as the non-biased situation is concerned with the applicants who come with the airline. So that today, you'll find that in every airline that there is, you'll find African-American crew members flying along, usually co-pilots and first pilots and captains, and even with our service lines like UPS and FedEx have black crew members, including pilots, with them. I brought tears to my eyes, I guess about a year ago, maybe a little longer than that, but I was taking a trip from on Delta Airlines from Detroit here, going out west, and I'm planing or getting onto the airplane. I just happened to look in the pilot's compartment, and my goodness, I saw two black Americans in there in the pilot's compartment. One was the pilot and one was the co-pilot. And so it was really terrific. But not only that, would you believe they both were female? So anyway, we had a ride as far as was concerned. I decided that my time was running out as far as my dream was concerned of being a airline pilot, and I decided that what I would have to do was back up my position there and have a backup plan as far as it's concerned. So I went back to school, and actually I went to night school to go ahead and finish up on required subjects that I needed in order to enter college as a engineering student. After finishing up that and getting those requirements, I went to New York University College of Engineering and got my degree in engineering and went up the corporate line. As that and retired here, my last assignment brought me here to Detroit, and I was with a firm called the A&R Pipeline Company, which was a multinational, really, pipeline company. And I retired from there as their Vice President of Administrative Services in 1988. At that time, I felt as though I didn't want to just lollygag around after retirement. I was only in my 60s. But later on, I was a member of the local Tuskegee Airmen organization, and the Tuskegee Airmen at that time received 4 aircraft from the United States Air Force. These were obsolete aircraft. They were still flyable, very workable, but the Air Force was going to get some new aircraft, advanced aircraft. And they were sending these aircraft that they had to various universities and museums throughout the United States. The Tuskegee Airmen had their museum at this time here, and they were using City Airport also. So the 4 of these aircraft were delivered to the Tuskegee Airmen in City Airport. But when they were delivered, the Tuskegee Airmen said, well, what do we do now? We don't have any pilots who can fly these things. So I decided I'd dust off my license there, and I'd go ahead and get an instructor pilot and learn how to fly these motor gliders. Motor glider being an assisted takeoff glider, and it has a little engine on it there, and you can assist you in takeoff. And once you get to altitude, if it's a nice hot summer day, you can shut the engine off, and you can float around on these thermals and maybe stay up for a couple of hours if you can find these thermals to fly around on. Well, anyway, I decided to use the skill to take local neighborhood kids up, and I would take them up to introduce them to aviation and what the aviation was about, hoping that this might inculcate some desire in them to proceed and probably take some job in the airlines or some allied business in aviation, which a number of them did, and a number of these kids became pilots, and not only the male members, but some of the female members became pilots, and pilots with some of the airlines that we have. So I guess I don't want to divulge too much in the book. I'd like you to go ahead and enjoy a lot. There's a lot that's in there that I haven't talked about. I'll mention one more, and that's it. But maybe 2 more. But anyway, while back in this country, I was down in South Carolina with the P-47 that I was flying on maneuvers. And flying back to Columbus, where I was stationed at the time, I had engine trouble, and in fact, I was in the clouds at the time there and had engine failure. And there were mountains in this area of Kentucky, and I rode the plane down to about 8,000 feet, and I said, I better get out of here. So I bailed out, and the plane struck ground, was demolished completely, and it hit the ground about 100 yards from the cabin of a young girl, and her name was Loretta West, and it was in Butcher Hollow, Kentucky. And Loretta West today, her name is Loretta Lynn. That's right. So I had chance, well, not at that time, but I landed in my parachute about a mile away from there, and of course, the people who saw the parachute come down, you know, they came to greet me, and then when they got within viewing distance of me, of course, they stopped and hesitated for a while, and looked at this apparition, you know, my God, you know. But anyway, they were very good. They took me into town, and I was sort of a town celebrity, and all forgotten about for this happened in 1948 for a number of years. I guess around 2002 or 5, I got a call from a historian down in Van Lear, Kentucky. That's the county that Butcher Hollow is in. And he said, gee, he says, I've been looking for you for a long time because we have rumors down here about some pilot, a black pilot that landed or crashed in the area here, but the news account of it is lost. And so I said, well, what is the rumor that you heard about it? He says, well, the rumor is that a black pilot, that a black man stole a B-52 and was making a bombing run on the town here, and the American fighters were called in and they shot him down. I fell off my chair laughing. Anyway, believe it or not, 2 years later, I was down in Butcher Hollow, or I was down in Van Lear, Kentucky, as the parade marshal of their annual homecoming down there. It's just a delightful time that I had for 5 days down there. That's just one of the incidents you might want to read about there. I guess the last one I'll say is when I was heading out to the Spider Gunnery meet, at the time I flew from here, or from Columbus to, in the fighter plane, to Oklahoma City, I think it was, to gas up. Then from Oklahoma City up to, I forget the name of the place now, but anyway, I was heading to Albuquerque, New Mexico. From Albuquerque, I made a straight heading going to Las Vegas, Nevada, the Las Vegas Air Force Base. The ground, as I was flying along, I was flying what's known as my altitude barometer, altitude reading, and what was happening is the ground was increasing as I was coming up. The elevation of the ground was, so the closer I got to the ground. And then all of a sudden a big hole opened up in the ground, and it was the Grand Canyon. And I did a no-no. I decided that I wanted to go down in the Grand Canyon a little bit, not all the way to the bottom, but around to the lip of the canyon on the edge there. And of course there were people who were standing at these vistas along the edge there. They called the vistas, and they were waving at me like this, and I would wave back at them. Anyway, that was a fun time. And, had I been reported, if that happened today, I would be put under the jail. Those are the things you could get away with within those days. But this is a number of those vignettes like that are in the book, and that's it. Soaring to Glory, and yes, and I'm going to take some questions now. Yes, hi, Ralph.
You didn't mention that you and other Tuskegee Airmen were invited to the White House, and you were given accommodation by George W. Bush.
Yes, that's in the book here. The Tuskegee Airmen, the Bush administration. Yes, okay. My daughter's telling me to drink some water. But anyway, the Bush administration urged Congress to present a congressional medal to the Tuskegee Airmen, which was done, and I was invited to the Capitol building along with a number of other Tuskegee Airmen. There were 7 of us who were invited to stand with George Bush at the time there, and there are pictures of this in the book there. But the Tuskegee Airmen were given the Congressional Gold Medal as a result of the exploits they did during World War II. Do I have any other questions here? Yes, sir.
I thought when you went through that Kentucky thing, that you decided you were going to take a straight shortcut, and you went through that thunderhead, and that's what dropped you down.
Yeah, that's what it did. Yeah, yeah. Flew into a thunderhead there. And, right. It was another no-no, but anyway. Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember or know our certain instructor Roscoe Draper?
Yes.
I just went to he was honored for his 100th birthday and for the Tuskegee Airmen being an instructor at the Tuskegee Institute where the school was. And I have some pictures I'll be sure to show you.
Okay, I'd love to
that
see
was
them.
May the 5th.
Right.
Yes, a friend of mine is very close to his family.
Okay.
And there was about 500 people there, but it was also the excuse me, it was the annual fundraiser for the Philadelphia chapter of
Okay.
the Tuskegee Airmen.
All right.
So it was their chapter and
Yes.
fundraiser.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be around his 100th birthday.
Right. Okay. Talking about age, let's see. Of the 12 Tuskegee Airmen that I'm talking about who were in combat that are living today, the oldest is Charles McGee. He's 99. He was 99 in last December. And he has an extraordinary background. He flew in combat in 3 wars. That was World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. But he flew as a combatant in each one of those. And when he got out of the service, I think he had more hours than any other pilot or current pilot in the United States Air Force at the time. But he's still living today, and he's doing very well. And he also provided a blurb for the book here. The other pilot is my brother-in-law, who lives in Irvine, California, and he's 99, and he was 99 in February, and in fact, February 29th, so really he can't be 99. February 29th, he has to be 1/4 of that age, you know. But I did get to see him just this week when we were out in California. Another vignette and another little story about my brother-in-law there. He was an operations officer in the squadron that I went into, the 301st Fighter Squadron, overseas. I didn't know him before that, but he went into the service from New York and from the borough of Manhattan. I went into the service from New York, the borough of Queens. They're both pretty close to one another, but I didn't know him before then, you know. We're talking about 6 million people in New York at that time, you know, hardly all of them. But anyway, he called up after we got home, and he happened to have my number, and he called up and he said, "Harry," he says, come on over to the house. He says, "I'd like you to meet my family." And I went over and met the family, and little did I know that was to end up with a 68-year marriage to his sister. He did that again to one of his classmates, you know, and he said, "Come on, I want you to meet my sister here, you know." And the other sister, Louise, and they got married, you know. And while he was making an appearance one time, somebody asked him, and he says, "Well, did you do that a third time?" And he says, "No." And he said, "Why?" He said, "I ran out of sisters." He was quite a comedian. And anyway, and yes, Rob.
I understand the date of your birth is made a national holiday.
yeah, said he's coming along, we'll make a national holiday. No, I was born on July 4th. Yeah. So anyway, people ask and say, well, you know, what sparked your interest in aviation, and what created you this compulsion to, you know, fly? And my parents told me, I was born in Newport News, Virginia, that we were near Langley Field. There was a military base there, and my parents told me that the military planes would fly over, and I couldn't talk yet, but I would raise my head and look at the planes and just Google at them. And parents were, when I was 2, the parents moved to New York City, and they moved to the borough of Queens, and they moved about 1.5 miles from the airport called North Beach Airport. Today is better known as LaGuardia Airport. But as a teenager, I used to go over to the airport there and sit, you know, and look at the planes flying in and out and fantasize about being a pilot. And I said, one of these days I want to fly one of those planes. You know? I think that's what sparked my interest, and of course, propitiously, well, I shouldn't say propitiously, but the war came along, World War II, and the opportunity presented itself, and I took advantage of the opportunity. I'm going to certainly do some book signing if you're interested. Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. My pleasure.
I do believe you got to purchase the book first.
Right. Oh, there's a extra added attraction here. Don't let me forget to do this for each book that you buy there has a pen here from the Tuskegee Airmen. This you can take with you. Okay. That should be enough. All right. How you doing?
This would be the Ian. He was the kid that went with you on the reply when you out of City Airport.
Oh yeah.
So I'm here.
Okay. You want me to sign it to him?
Yeah.
Okay. Really good. So tell me, how are things going?
Going well. Yeah. I look forward to seeing you shortly also.
Okay, this is all right.
Last year,
I made a picture of you at that fly-in time.
Okay.
And I'll show you where it sits on top of my computer.
All right. All right.
Thanks for all you do.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. I'll be seeing you around.
You mentioned the airport at Palm Springs.
Yes.
I was there visiting a friend one time, and there was a guy with a privately owned P-51, and he was just getting ready to take off, and he had some kind of minor problem, so he stopped to take care of that. The plane was gorgeous. He had polished the whole thing, even inside the covers on the wheel wells. Everything was slick and shiny and polished. It was a gorgeous aircraft.
Did he have any artwork on the
I don't recall. Well, when I was a kid, I used to live near McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento, and the north-south runway, planes coming off went right over our property, and I could hear the 51s coming.
You know them by the sound. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Outstanding.
Absolutely. To anyone? Or?
Bob Humphrey. Do the whole thing.
all right, you're welcome. You can take the books off the table. Yeah, take the book, but you gotta. For those that are taking the books off the table, I do believe they belong to the bookstore.
Right.
So I do believe you got to go up to the cash register to pay for it.
How much are they?
To be honest, I don't know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Harry, did you get my email about the
I don't know.
Breakfast Club?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Will you have some of these books when you're at the Breakfast Club?
I haven't seen this since.
See, I'm not showing any of the books, but it's being done through
So I don't know if they got any more.
And,
or not.
you can get them at the store here, or you can go ahead and get them from Amazon.com on the internet.
Well, I know Christine would like to have some books at the senior center.
Right, and I just have, these are going to the
Yeah, I understand that.
Barnes and Noble here.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, if necessary, I'll go buy some at Amazon, and I'll have them at the book signing in September.
Sure.
I'll talk about that later.
All right, and there is somebody that's with the publishing company that you could talk to, if you wanted to buy some in bulk or something like that,
Okay.
Right.
All right, well, I'll see you later, and give me his name and phone number.
I will.
Okay.
Okay.
Great, Harry.
Fine.
Were you including one of those pens with the...
Oh, yes. My goodness. Oh, all right. There you go. All right. Well, Mrs. Bob. How are you?
Okay. All right.
here's the book,
Uh-huh.
and I paid for it, there's the,
Larry and Elaine.
yeah,
Okay.
I put that right out there for you.
Very good. All right. We'll go ahead and write it here, okay?
That'd be great.
My son and his son.
Okay. Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Here you are. Thank you very much.
I want to know if you here.
Sure.
Just for a second, just something. I don't know. I
Just
love
sign
this.
it.
Anyway.
I think right here. Maybe right here.
That was a really nice article.
Thank you. It was good. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, that's right.
I was going to take pictures. I thought, that's not mine.
Hi there.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. Kevin, K-E-V-I-N?
Yeah.
All right.
They've taken palette classes.
Right. Sure you can. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Your book here, you can go up and
All right, 1, 2, 3. Okay, pick up you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Got it.
All right, Colonel. Good to see you again, sir.
Good seeing you.
I'm getting two of your books, but if you could like this one to me, to Tony.
Okay, to Tony.
Yep.
Yes.
From the, obviously from the chapter.
Sure. Yes.
G-O-N-Y.
Well, good grief. Did you like stop at lunch along the way? What'd you have good? Good?
Yeah. Well, and I think this was after you had your third kill.
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind saying that before as well.
All righty.
I'm having that blown up for a poster size. When we have our next meeting, I'll have you
Would
sign
you
it.
like me to sign this?
Yeah, right there's great, sir.
Well, you and I should go out to lunch together. We're the same age.
Thank you very much, girl.
What's this? Did you have another book there?
Well, the other one I want to link, but then I'm going to have to order some more. So,
Okay.
good seeing you.
Do you need me to get more orders for you?
Do you have a form?
How are you?
I'm doing fine.
Yes, sir. I can do
All right,
this
how are you? And shall I make this too?
Okay, my email address. I don't know how many
Yes,
I'm looking to
that'll
order.
take probably...
Yeah. Do you remember me? I used to work here.
Oh, yes.
I'm the one that interviewed
I
you
couldn't
for my
get the
school
VIN.
paper.
Yes, that's right. Yes, yes, I remember that. Okay, good. And you got a pen here.
Thank you.
All righty. Do you want to take a picture?
Yeah.
Oh,
sure.
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 Okay.
Perfect. I think I got it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
My name is Mike.
Hello, Mike.
How are you?
Oh,
This is my favorite picture.
Oh, yes, yeah.
That's my Mustang.
Oh, wow, that's great. Did you see the one out here?
Yeah, I'm going to take pictures of it.
Yeah, right.
That's great.
Okay.
look, huh?
Turn sideways. All right, thank you.
Okay, Mike, let me get this pen to you before we
All right, great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Mike, is it again?
Mike,
Oh, cool. Detroit RedTail would like to thank the monetary contributions of individual contributors and is brought to you by the Detroit chapter of Tuskegee Airmen, Incorporated, the Tuskegee Airmen National Museum, and Detroit RedTail. Donate and help keep RedTail rolling the Tuskegee Airmen into the American car culture.